all of these things had to be figured out. And it took us a couple months to really get in the groove. But once we did, then we started cruising.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Talal, and you are listening to the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. On today's show, we are joined by a very special guest. She is one of the finest cinematographers working in the industry today. Her work can now be seen on season 17 of the Emmy winning drama Grey's Anatomy, which is now airing on ABC. On the show today, the very talented Alicia Robbins. How are you, Alicia?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming to hang out on the show today. How have you been over this last year? We're living in such a crazy world
It's
right
been
now.
crazy.
Oh, tell me about it, especially someone in the creative arts. How's it been?
Yeah, it's hard to be creative when you're in a pandemic. I'll
Oh,
say
whew,
that.
say the
But we
least.
were very fortunate to be able to still do the show in the middle of all this and actually stay safe and do some pretty cool things this season. So yeah, but it's been a whirlwind. It's nice. I'm done with the season personally, and it's nice that I can have my face mask off and breathe for a while. So
Oh,
yeah, it's been bonkers.
oh, I can imagine. Now, for Alicia Robbins personally, what's one thing you took away throughout this entire pandemic? Is there a new TV show you started watching, a new movie, a new hobby, or something you started to rekindle your love for? Is there one thing that pops up?
Oh wow. Because I was working almost the entire time. Um my new hobby was really just trying to relax as much as I could when I had a chance to do so. Um Hot tubbing, new
Say,
fun hobby for me. When I can get in a hot tub.
why not, right? Of
So
course.
yeah. And also just trying to get out on a bicycle and get out into the wilderness and go camping and be in the woods. Like I've always been a camper. And this year it seemed to be even more important to be able to do that on weekends, just to get out into the middle of nowhere and see some trees and mountains. And so it's not really a newfound hobby, but it was a more appreciated hobby during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's so great, especially because I feel like that's the one thing that, if there's anything that we can take out of all this craziness, is a lot of us started to, step back and appreciate the smaller things and appreciate the things we may have loved and maybe lost along the way. And hot tubbing sounds great. That's I'm glad that you at least had that.
We bought an inflatable hot tub at the very beginning of the pandemic. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is actually an amazing purchase because we didn't want to invest in a really expensive one just in case weren't going to use it. And so we ended up getting like a $500 inflatable one, and it's been awesome. It's been really good. So maybe we'll upgrade in the next year or so and get a real one.
There we go, guys. Always find that one thing.
Hot tubbing.
Uh, hot tubbing. There we go. Now, before we deep dive into all things Grays, I'm so curious and fascinated by your story. I want the audience to really get to know Alicia Robbins. So, where does this all begin for you? Where did your love of the creative arts start, and what were some of your early influences?
Early influences. I really didn't start getting influenced in the cinematography world until later, when I was in college. I didn't know that I wanted to go into camera work until I was probably a junior in college and undergrad. I've always been drawn to movies, though. I've always loved movies. Growing up, it was always Spielberg. I loved
Mm.
Spielberg films. One of my favorite films is Close Encounters, and I even watched it again recently just because I love it so much. I feel like at least his early work really found a nice blend of how to tell story through the lens as well as using music to enhance it. And I come from a music background. My family is all musicians and music teachers. And so I always found that when there was a good combination of music that pushed a story forward, I was really drawn to it. And I do feel like a lot of the early Spielberg work did that. Uh, so I loved that. I didn't know anything about cinematography, and I didn't really start learning about camera work until I got into college. And I was interested in filmmaking, but I didn't know that camera would be what I was drawn to. And it was really kind of a switch that happened. I was shooting for the Vanderbilt TV station, doing segments that I was producing and also being the on-camera talent for. And one day I didn't have a camera person there to shoot the content for me. And so I had to take the camera and figure it out and shoot the content myself. Um, and I was like, ooh, this is kind of cool. I like this technical aspect of this. And so I actually stopped being an on-camera talent and started working more behind the scenes and producing my own work and shooting my own work, and then trying to get on any projects that that I could get my hands on. I ended up living in Los Angeles over a couple of different summers while I was in undergrad, and being a PA and actually a Universal Studios tour guide one year.
No way.
So just to try to see, just to learn more about what happens behind the scenes on filmmaking. But it was actually, and I've talked about this story before because it is a pretty significant reason why I ended up in cinematography. I knew I wanted to make films. I knew I wanted to be behind the scenes, but I wasn't sure exactly what a cinematographer did. And it was on a movie that came through Alabama, and I was a PA on it, and I was 20 at the time. And Wally Pfister, who's an Academy Award winning cinematographer, was the DP on it. And this was before he was famous. This is before he started working with Nolan and doing the big work that he does now.
And all that,
Yeah, this was all before that. And I was just fascinated by what he was doing on set, and just the way that he commanded the camera department, but he had such a great personality. And so I figured out, okay, so that's what a cinematographer is. I understand now what he's doing. And I would just observe him, and he also gave me some advice on how to get into the business doing what he did. And one of the things that he suggested was to apply to AFI, because that's where he had gone to school. And so that's what I did. My senior year while I was at Vanderbilt, I worked towards creating content that I could actually use as my reel to get into AFI. And so that's the path that I took. So he was a big influence.
Oh, that's such an amazing influence to have, especially someone with his creative vision and just his eye for the shot. And that's awesome, because not many people can say they had an Academy Award winner almost in many ways take them under your wing and just like guide you in the right path. It's crazy.
Yeah, and before he actually became famous too.
Yeah.
So when he started landing the Nolan projects and started actually shooting these huge movies, I was like, oh my gosh, I know him. I used to bring him iced coffee. What? So yeah, it was. So then I knew that, okay, I did see something special. Obviously, he wasn't just another DP. He was something special. And so being influenced by that, the right leader to doing what I'm doing.
To say the least, definitely. Do you remember what your first on-set experience was?
My very first on-set experience.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Well, that was that movie, because I that was my second year in undergrad, and I was trying to go back out to Los Angeles to the previous year I was a tour guide. So I wasn't really on set. That was more of you've seen the tram tour. It's not really, you're
Right,
not
right.
really on set. So I didn't know that generally you do a 12-hour day on films. Like that's standard.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I thought jobs are 9 to 5. I didn't know that anything was different with the film industry. So my first day as a production assistant on that movie that came through Birmingham, Alabama, I I left my house because I was at my parents' house at the time, and I told them, I said, well, we got to be there at 7 a.m. So I guess I'm gonna be home by like 4. Like that's I thought I might be home by
Wishful
4
thinking.
o'clock
Yeah.
because right. And then sure enough, 7 o'clock rolls around and we're still working. And this was before cell phones too. Well, not really before cell phones. I just didn't have one at the time because it wasn't, you know,
Yeah, of
this is
course.
like
Yeah.
98. So, and I came home from work that day. My parents were like, are you okay? Why were you gone so long? And I had to tell them, I said, this is how it's going to be. Apparently 12 hours is the minimum amount of time that you're on set. So yay. And they said, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, honestly, it's still one of the most fun days I've ever
Oh, I
had in
bet.
my entire life, even though I was standing at the end of the street and blocking traffic from coming down the road. That's what I was doing on my first day. And I still had so much fun because it was just cool calling out rolling and cut and my little hamburger headset on. And yeah, it was a blast.
That's so interesting you bring that up because I get that gist and that kind of vibe from so many creative artists that I speak to. A 12-hour day or a 15-hour day doing something you truly love and something that's truly your calling in life beats a 9 to 5 sitting behind an office desk any day of the week.
It really does. And actually at the time I was also doing an internship that was only 2 days a week, and it was an office job internship. And I dreaded the days that I had to go in there. I looked
Oh,
forward to the days that I got to be the PA on the movie doing 14 hours and dreaded the 9 to 5 at the desk internship job that I had. So I knew, okay, I have to get into film somehow. If you can enjoy, like you said, something for 15 hours a day, then you're in the right profession.
yeah, that triumphs that 9 to 5 struggle that so many people go through just doing a job that they just don't want to do, but they're just kind of stuck in that little position, or they're maybe they don't have the courage to maybe step up and go out. So that's why I just implore everyone and just our little chat right here about that. It's so important. Just follow your dreams and really go after what you want to do with your life because you'll live such a more fulfilling way that way.
You have to at least try. You have to
Yeah.
try. I understand that there might be a time limit for some people on
Hmm.
trying to pursue a passion. I mean, obviously things can come up, kids,
Right.
family, whatever, where it's
Hmm.
like, okay, I've got to just hunker down and get something
Yeah.
that
The
pays the
mortgage
bills.
bills. Yeah.
It's totally understandable. But if you can keep on pushing towards a goal, and at some point you have to figure out whether or not you can do it or not. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that I don't know if I don't want to say that don't have the talent to do it, but if you're pushing towards something that you haven't studied or that you haven't really put in the hours that you need to
Right.
become an expert in that
Hmm.
field, then I don't know how you're ever really going to get a chance at doing what it is that you want. You have to practice. You have to actually get good at that
Yeah.
job. You can't be a jazz musician without playing your scales. You know what I mean? So, I do feel like there's a lot of modern day youth and not just youth, honestly, feeling that you can just, and that's just, I think some people have gotten lucky in that regard, but
Yeah.
most people you've got to put in the practice for it. So I do talk about that a lot with classes that I teach and as a mentor to younger cinematographers. It's about practicing.
No, that's so true. And especially like as you kind of mentioned, there's this entitled shift almost in today's generation where we all want things now. And we sometimes forget that you need to put in the hours, the dedication. It's great to go after something you really want. But in a lot of those fields that we really want to do, you really need to carve yourself that space. And the only way to do it is to really go after it and put in the hours, as you mentioned. Now, taking that and transitioning that over to your personal career as you first started off, I'm really curious. Was it a linear trajectory where it was you did one project and then followed up by another, followed up by another? Or was it more so like a roller coaster where you did a project, you had a great high, and then sometimes you get that little dip and then it goes right back up? How was your
Oh
career
yeah.
starting off?
Roller coaster with loops, and sometimes the cart went off the track
uh,
and fell
no
into the
seatbelt.
water and got pulled out. And I mean, yeah, no, there's no, I don't think that there is many linear trajectories in artists' path.
Yeah.
I don't know too many people who have ever had that experience of, oh, I'm going to do this, and now I move to this level, and I move to this. I think that's more
Yeah.
of a corporate structure.
Hmm.
There are ways to pursue cinematography in that kind of structure, and that would be going through the camera department. So working your way up through the camera department. So starting
Right.
off as a loader, then a second AC, then a first AC, then an operator, then a DP. That is probably the most linear trajectory that someone could take towards cinematography.
Hmm.
I did not choose that route. I think it was mostly because I had already done AFI as a grad program, that me starting out in the loader AC position didn't really make sense to me.
Hmm.
Um, I just decided to start shooting, and even if it was really low budget, I figured that that was a better way for me to practice my craft
Yeah.
than to go through the AC route. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm sure other people have very strong opinions about why it's necessary to go up through the AC route. But I just found, for me creatively, it was better for me to just do lower budget work. Um, and sometimes even take on electric work. I did some electric work in an electric department, and then I started to operate more. And then as I was operating, I was able to join the union, but I was always shooting. I was, throughout the 16 years before I pretty much kind of got my break, so to speak, I was always shooting something, and anything that I was attracted to, whether it be documentary or a music video or whatever it was. If I was drawn to either the people or the story, or possibly getting to do something cool, then I would shoot it. And it almost didn't matter what the budget was. So yeah, definitely not a linear path. Um, so yeah, it was more of a roller coaster for sure. I'm still
Hey,
on the roller coaster. That never stops. The ride is going to continue. I'm just hoping that this time it won't fall off the tracks sometimes. Maybe it can at least stay on.
I hear you. And you know what? I think after 16 years, you probably gotten the seatbelt on a bit tighter. The tracks are,
Yeah.
greased up a bit more. I think, will be a smooth sailing, hopefully from here on
Oh
out.
yeah, I have the full harness now. I got the full harness, and I'm ready for the loop. So yeah.
Oh yeah. That's so great. And one thing that I'm really fascinated about is you starting off like 16 years ago, even maybe prior to that, when you were just shooting in college and university. And now the resources that people have, especially cinematographers, having just a smartphone like this, you can literally go out and record an entire film and even edit it on your phone. What do you think is the biggest difference from starting off pre smartphones versus now, where anyone can really pursue this career if they really put the time and effort into it?
I think that a blessing and a curse on could practice.
Hmm.
Um, but I, because yeah, it was always really hard to get your hands on good equipment. And at the time
Yeah.
when I was starting out, the digital medium wasn't that big yet. It was still, if you wanted to shoot something substantial, it needed to be on film. And so that was really expensive. And finally, they started coming out with HD cameras like the Sony F900, and Panasonic VariCam had just been released. And as soon as those kind of cameras started coming out, I immediately embraced it, because I knew it was going to be a chance for me to practice more and more without having to spend a lot of money. But yeah, right now you can shoot almost anything with your phone at 4K resolution. And that's great. And it's good practice, but you still have to remember that this is not what makes good cinema. And even back then too, whether or not you're shooting on film or digital or a high camera, that also still didn't make it either good or bad cinema. It's always going to be, how are you using those frames to tell that story? What is the story that you're telling? I think people worry about what the equipment is too much. So in that regard, actually, yeah, go shoot on your phone. Practice making stories. Practice how you move your phone to tell that story. See what it feels like if you can zoom in on it. I mean, these cameras on mine, I have a zoom lens on my phone. Like, see how it feels different if you're zoomed all the way in at this frame size versus zoomed all the way out at the same frame size. What does that feel like? How does that change the perspective that you're in when you're shooting that way? So the tools are still pretty much the same. You still have to practice. Luckily, everyone can practice now. They can practice doing something. And I think that's really cool, because I didn't have that opportunity when I was first starting out. I would have to find a producer that was willing to rent some gear, then we can practice. So I do think that people should take advantage of that if they can. Of course they can. Everyone has a phone.
Oh yeah. Well, there you go, everyone. You got Alicia Robbins Masterclass Chapter 5, just free of charge right here on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's transition over to what I think is such a great show, and a show that just continues to keep reinventing itself. And that's Grey's Anatomy. It's season 17. That's just mind blowing, especially in today's streaming crazy world and the amount of new content we're getting. This show just keeps on trucking. What was the call like for getting this gig? It does. Were you a fan of the show before you got on? What was the call like for getting the gig?
Yeah. I actually started watching from season 1. So I was a fan of the show. I was really excited about it when I found out that they were interested in hiring a new DP over there to start just shooting a couple of episodes to see how it goes. I was really excited about it, because it also was going to be my first experience as shooting a whole episode of big television. I had done For the People previously, but I wasn't a full-time DP on that. So the first episode that I did of Grey's Anatomy was the first episode that I had ever completely shot on my own of television. So that was a little scary. Like, I better not mess this up. And it was also 1519, which was the episode Silent All These Years, which was a really powerful episode. And I had to put 150% effort into that, because I needed to make sure that I was doing a really good job and got them what they were looking for. But yeah, no, I was really excited. And so after I did those 2 episodes for season 15, they asked me back to join them again for season 16 as a full-time alternating DP. And of course, that was a no-brainer for me.
Oh, well, for sure. Now, one thing that's very interesting about this season is you guys are shooting a fictional TV show depicting a real-life pandemic as we live in a real-life pandemic. Is your head spinning yet? This show seems to be living in Christopher Nolan's Inception right now. It really, really does. Can't even imagine just on set the way you guys have to go through everything. So What's the approach to shooting a project like this as you're shooting it during COVID?
It's not easy, because there's so many limitations with just
Yeah,
how we can move around the set and how we can interact with each other. The one thing that is so important in any filmmaking culture is communication
oh yeah,
and how you communicate with each other. And all of a sudden, when you're in masks and face shields at all times, a lot of that communication is broken down, and you're not getting the information, or you're not even giving uh, or receiving the information that you need to do your job. Uh, um, there was something that even my AD and I were commenting on, that there's so many things when you're on set that are just unspoken in how things are handled, and how your instincts play a big part on what's going to happen next. And a lot of what we do is we eavesdrop. I know that sounds so weird, but when you're on set, you're always eavesdropping. You're listening to what your prop person is saying, because you hear them talking about a reflection on an iPad. And so immediately you're going, oh, I already know that. I maybe need to start thinking about what I can do with the lighting to help with that reflection. You're constantly eavesdropping on conversations so that you're thinking 10 steps ahead. It's not like it's frowned upon that you're listening in on other people's
right.
conversations. That's what we
Mhm.
do as filmmakers. But with COVID, and now we have masks and face shields on, and we have to keep our distance, that part, a lot of that went away. So now,
Yeah.
instead of just being able to listen and eavesdrop and hear what might be happening, you're now having to rely on all those people to communicate to you directly what it is that they need. And so trying to get used to that habit of repeating yourself constantly, constantly asking questions over and over and over again to make sure that you're really understanding what it is that someone's trying to say to you. That was something that I think everyone had to learn this year, is to over communicate and to really hone in and try to listen as best you can. It was hard for me because I feel like I read lips when I'm talking to someone. Not that I can't hear, but I do rely on looking at someone's face and reading their lips to really understand them. And then all of a sudden that was gone. And so I had to retrain my brain to
Mhm.
watch eye movement and really listen to what it is that they're saying in order to understand it. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but we still made it work. I think it took us a couple of months though to really get in the groove. The first couple of
Right.
months were hard because people also just had to figure out, how do you hydrate? You can't drink any fluids on
Yeah.
set because you can't pull your mask down to drink. So how do you make sure that you're getting the nutrients that you need in your body to sustain? All of these things had to be figured out, and it took us a couple of months to really get in the groove. But once we did, then we started cruising, and we were making our 10-hour days and still getting almost just as much content as we'd shot before. And it was pretty fascinating how well our crew adapted. And I don't know if that's how it was on a lot of other sets, but I felt like our crew adapted incredibly well and fast.
For sure. And in terms of technicality wise, being a cinematographer, did you have to adapt? I know you spoke a lot about just getting in the groove of things and having to listen in and having that imperative communication in terms of focal lengths, lenses, and the types of cameras you were using on the show. Did you feel that you had to adapt in terms of keeping the distance between the cast and just getting in and getting the shot that you normally would pre-COVID, but now you're in this crazy world where you have to find alternate ways of getting that shot? How was that process for you personally?
Yeah, because a lot of Grey's Anatomy works in small spaces, it wasn't really about necessarily going longer lenses where the camera was distant from the actors. Instead, we telescoping crane that a
Mm.
camera always lived on, so it could pickle out and get in places that we normally wouldn't be able to put a camera operator with the camera. And it was actually the first of its kind in the US. So it was really exciting to be able to get that crane on this show. And it was a really spectacular piece of equipment. And then the B camera, we also had on a remote head. So it wasn't manually operated by the camera operator. It was a remote system that he operated from a ways away. And so then it was only a dolly grip that was in the room. And then the third camera, we try to keep on the longer lenses. And so that was a thing too. It was weird because even though we were supposed to make the set smaller and less populated, we ended up going with 3 cameras at all times because we also knew that we needed to get extra coverage and faster to make our days. So we always had 3 cameras, but you don't see a lot of people around because we'd had 2 of those cameras completely remote. And that's kind of how we handled at least keeping the distance from the actors. And then of course, anyone who is on set has to be in the mask and the face shield all the time. There wasn't a pulling your shield off, and we would get fussed
Right.
at
I bet.
because you
Jeez.
forget sometimes, you flip it up because you're doing something, and so they always
Mhm.
come around and they're like, shield, you're like, okay. So yeah, I mean, we did get to experiment a little bit with how we moved the camera this season, and I think you feel that because we're living on that crane all the time.
Yeah.
Almost every single scene, there's going to be a pretty cool camera move that gets you into it. And we didn't get to do that last season as much. We'd have a crane maybe 1 or 2 days of an episode, but this time we had it every single day for every single scene. So it gave us that ability to be really creative and be creative on the fly with the camera movement. So in some ways, COVID liberated us a little bit because we were able to have that crane all the time.
Oh,
So once COVID's done, I don't know if they're going to take the crane away at that point or what, but I really loved it. So I hope that it can stick around.
well, that's interesting you bring that up because let's talk a little bit about that. The impact of COVID on this industry going forward. What do you think is going to be the new norm? Is it going to be eventually, really hoping that things do get to somewhat of a new normal or whatever that may look like? But from someone's perspective who's in the trenches, who's shooting these shows, in your opinion, what's the future of this industry and cinematographers especially?
I do think that one thing that might stick around is Zoom meetings
Yeah,
because
this kind of
it
stuff. Yeah.
is help. Yeah, if you're having to go into a conference room every single time you need to have a meeting with producers or other creatives, it's time consuming. So to be able to sit at your desk and be able to do screen sharing with ideas and photographs, and
Yeah.
like our production designer would do screen shares of overhead maps of what he's thinking, and being able to have that without being in a conference room, I think a lot of that might stick around. I still like to have the one-on-one meetings as well, especially with my director.
Mhm.
But I do think a lot of production meetings will probably still happen over Zoom. And I actually hope that they do because it does, I think, help speed up the process.
Sounds more.
As long as everyone's paying attention.
Yeah, well,
Sometimes
that's.
people don't pay attention though. So it gets, because you get Zoom fatigue. So you got to
Oh,
find a balance. You got to find a
yeah.
balance of meetings with Zoom and meetings without. Um, I think that I would love it if shorter days would stay. I don't know if that's going to happen because trying to meet the 10-hour day requirement, that was actually for us. We had a 10-hour day requirement because it's
Gotcha.
hard to be in that PPE over 10 hours. It really
Right.
is. And
Mhm.
so that was just determined that to keep everyone safe and sane during COVID, we need to try to be meeting these 10-hour days. It's really to get need in a 10-hour time period. It's doable, but I felt, for me, I felt like I was just my wheels were spinning constantly all day long. Like there
Oh, I
wasn't
bet.
a time to just breathe and take a moment because it was just like we got to hit these timelines in order to make our 10-hour day. It would be cool for the crew if we could keep 10s, but I think that after COVID's done, I think we'll probably go back to a 12-hour standard, honestly. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
wrong. Here's
Hey,
wishful thinking, but
wishful thinking. Yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see, especially with as we transition over to a world where vaccinations are so much more prevalent in North America, especially. We're just gonna see how much more efficient and how much more of the lessons that we learned during this pandemic that we can apply to our everyday shoots, because it's going to be really interesting, because in an industry where you have to constantly adapt, now people are going to have to adapt once again as we ease off the restrictions, right?
yeah, I don't know if it's going to be that much adapting though. I think
Yeah.
people fall into their old habits pretty easily.
Fair enough. Yeah, but I'll give you that. That's true.
Yeah, especially if you've been doing it for so many years, to form a new habit this past year, I don't know if that's really going to stick around. But I do hope that the Zoom production meetings, I think finding a nice combination with that, I think could be really nice. And also people being able to remote work. I know some editors are working from home. Writers can work from
Yeah.
home. Like there's no reason to have everyone commuting to the set all the time. It's just it's adding to our carbon footprint to make people drive to a studio if they don't have to be there. So even for me, when I was doing pre-production, if I didn't have to go in for a COVID test, I would try to do pre-production from home with the Zoom calls so that I wasn't having to drive to the studio. So I do think that just to help LA traffic as well as our carbon footprint, if we can do more things remotely, that is in the pre-production world, I think that could be beneficial.
I love it. Alicia Robbins looking out for the world and our modern day Captain Planet. I love it. It's that's amazing. The final question that I have for you regarding all things cinematography, film, TV, creative arts. What does the creative arts mean to you?
Oh, wow.
Throw you that one right there.
That's a huge question. Oh my
Hey,
gosh.
there's no going back on that one. I got to hear your answer on this. I'm really
I
fascinated by
know,
what you're going to have to
right?
say.
Creative arts for me is my life. It has been and will always be. I grew up in the creative arts with my musical family. So I've never really known anything different than being in the creative arts. I can't imagine a life without being creative. And I feel that everyone should have some sort of involvement
Yeah.
with their own creativity. I think it's important because we discover more and more that innovations, technology, how we interact with people, how we communicate with each other is advanced and is better when there's a creative background to it. And I just feel like if we don't continue to push forward with letting people learn music, learn how to paint, learn how to do photographs, learn engineering is the creative art form. We won't advance as a society unless people can be creative. So not only is creative arts my life, but it is life. It is. Everything that we've done as human race has been because someone was creative. So that's how I feel about it. We
No,
have to continue pushing it for everyone to practice some sort of creative form.
that was a very deep answer. I'm getting goosebumps here. It's life. Creativity is life, and just
It's
coming from someone,
life.
it is. And as someone who works in the creative space for a living, it's just so great to hear those kind of amazing insights from someone who practices it day in and day out. And hey, you can be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, whatever. There's ways of finding that creativity within every field, every profession, and you really got to put yourself out there for that.
Absolutely. No, it's true.
For sure. As we wrap up with the great Alicia Robbins, it is now time for a segment I like to call the final act. Alicia, we're going to ask you 10 rapid fire questions about your likes, your dislikes, and I want the first thing that pops into your mind. Just blurt it out. But here's the catch. We're going to give you 60 seconds to try to get through as many of them as you can. If you go over the time limit, it's all good, but we just want the first thing that pops in your head. You up for the challenge?
Sure. Yes.
Movies or TV shows?
TV shows.
Theater or watch at home?
Theater.
Favorite movie?
Close Encounters.
Favorite TV show not named Grey's Anatomy?
Handmaid's Tale.
All right. One sequel better than the original?
Oh, oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Now I'm having a fog. Oh my gosh. Shoot.
Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Godfather.
Oh, none.
All right, you know what?
Sorry.
We'll give you the pass on this one. It's all good. Should Hollywood reboot Back to the Future?
Should it do what? Bring back?
Reboot Back to the Future.
No.
The default answer to that, for sure. Summer or fall?
Fall.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
No.
I like that answer. Film or digital?
Digital.
Favorite camera to shoot on?
Oh. Nope. I can't answer that. I'm camera agnostic. Sorry.
All right,
There's
we'll
no
cut
such
that
thing.
one out.
There's no such thing.
All right. And lastly, describe season 17 of Grey's Anatomy in one word.
Ooh. Dreamy.
There we go. Walk right into that one. That was awesome. You're great at that. And I love the honesty on all those answers there, especially the dreamy one. That was just,
The whole
I set myself
thing,
up.
though, that really, because I'm really trying to think.
Yeah,
That's hard because I don't like any sequels better than
Really?
the original one. Maybe you can enlighten me. What do you think is a good sequel?
Dark Knight is great. Let's see.
Okay, all right. I could see that, but I still like the first one.
Yeah, see, it's like I feel like sometimes when I ask that question, people think, "Oh, I'm choosing between one or the other." But hey, you can enjoy Batman Begins and like The Dark Knight. You can enjoy Fellowship of the Ring and like Two Towers, Godfather 1, Godfather 2, Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I still always like the first. I don't know. Yeah, that's a hard one because I don't really have one that I like over.
Well, how about this? Next time you're back on the show, I'm going to ask you that question, and there's not going to be a pass on that. This is going to be your homework for our next conversation.
All right, copy that.
Awesome.
Got it.
Alicia, thank you so much for coming to hang out on the show today. And thank you for your contributions to the creative arts. I'm such a fan of your work, and I'm so excited for the rest of this season for Grey's Anatomy. And I look forward to having you back on and discuss the next one.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you.